Velociraptor, a lot of people's favourite dinosaur. So today we're going to learn how to draw Velociraptor. So I've got a mechanical pencil here. I'm starting off with the main body shape. And coming off that's a nice big drumstick. Bit of a calf muscle there. And this is where the foot's going to be with toes. The other leg's sort of hidden behind the body. This is where the chest is going to be. The skull's going to be there. I'll connect that with a few lines for a neck. And a bit of the beak or the snout shape. The lower jaw. And a sort of snazzy little tongue. And a tail like that. That's kind of like the Jurassic Park. In fact, I've seen a picture like that in the Jurassic Park Velociraptor. I'm going to change the tail. The actual real Velociraptors have straighter tails. A lot of the vertebrae seem fairly fused and not very flexible. So it's probably going to stick up like a counterbalance. Just straightening the line. At this stage I'm sort of sketching fairly lightly, rubbing out a few lines if I have to. It's always handy to have an eraser. But none of these lines are going to be important because I'm going to go over all this with ink. So I want to put nice big long fingers on this. Kind of sort of like monster fingers. All ghoulish and that. So that's sort of roughly it. Now just to refine a few bits. A bit more meat on the drumstick. Bit of a knee, going to the ankle, down here, the foot, and rough in some claws. So if I go too fast at any stage, just pause the video. I'm going to speed forward in a few parts because it can get pretty boring. So during those times, if you are drawing along, just pause the video and catch up. But none of this has to be deadly accurate. Because I tend to, although I'm basing this on the Jurassic Park Velociraptors, there's a lot of variations, and at the end of this, it's not going to look anything like one from that movie. Because I'm going to add feathers to it. Okay, I've roughed out where the body's going to be, now I'm going to work on the face. If the face doesn't work out, I'll just abandon the whole thing. So the face is probably the next most important thing because that's what people tend to look at. Around the eyes, things like that. So you can see I'm shaping the line. I started off with just a straight line, now I'm shaping it. I'm working out where the teeth are going to go. So that's roughly worked out what I'm doing with the head. Giving it nice powerful jaws. And I feel like a crest of feathers here along the back of the head. I kind of think feathers that sort of stick up like that are kind of cool. Some birds have those, which looks pretty good. Now working on the arms here, actually putting in muscles very similar to human muscles. In that there's like a slight bicep and there's forearm muscles. That's one of the things about Jurassic Park, is that they humanised the dinosaurs so much to make them very evil. Yeah, they made them intelligent and almost human-like, able to open doors and things like that. Whereas I doubt if they'd be able to open the doors with these sort of hands. And feathers coming off the lower arms. A lot of ground birds have feathers. I once raised a native hen, which is a small bird that runs along the ground flat out and doesn't fly at all. And the interesting thing about the native hen is that when it takes a corner, puts its wings out as if it's banking when it's running along the ground. And so the tail and the wings of the native hen helps steer it as it's running flat out. So I sort of imagine that with a dinosaur like this, which is obviously not a flying dinosaur, although it would probably run pretty fast, and maybe having wings, or sort of like the beginnings of wings, might help steer it as it's going. So the legs do all the propulsion and the arms and tail sort of steer the animal as it's running flat out. Not that I'm a dinosaur expert at all, I'm just guessing, and just from my observation of other birds. Okay, let's just work on these chook legs. Chook is Australian for chicken, by the way. Let's work on these chicken legs. So I'm giving them nice claws, I'm giving them scales. Like if you ever looked at a chicken's leg or an emu's leg, ostrich legs, they're all very scaly. In fact, most birds have got scaly looking legs. One of the cool things about birds is their legs. They're almost like dragon-like legs. So I'm working on the tail, thickening it up a little bit. You'll notice that I always put a lot of darkness underneath. Lines on top can be a bit thin, but underneath I always put heavy lines. And I'm going to make that heavier and shade it in a bit more later. Now I'm going to use a ballpoint pen. And I'm just going to go over pretty much everything that I've done. Refine a few bits as I go. So when you ink something, go over, it's like you got a second chance to make little tiny micro corrections as you go. Like the teeth here, for example. Ballpoint pen's a great medium to work with for a couple of reasons. It's very subtle. It's you can press very lightly, get a very fine, almost grey line. You can press very heavy, you get almost an intense black. So that in itself is pretty cool. Downside is it's not archival. It's not like you can get there and frame this and sell it as a piece of art, because the ballpoint pen ink just sort of vanishes in UV light. So if you have anything that's signed with this and you leave it out in a sunny room, it's just going to eventually disappear like invisible ink. So I'm speeding this bit up. Like I say, you can sort of slow down and catch up. I'm doing lots of little dots and dashes, and this is sort of very personal thing in that it's like a signature. So you'll probably end up, if you do this, creating your own sort of versions of dots and dashes and little tiny letter U's, tiny letter V's to show feathers or scales. The way you render something, the patterns that you use, they become as individual as a signature. This is where style comes in. And when people sometimes smudge their drawings, you can't really see the style, you can't see that little individual like a signature. But when they're using ink, they're using bold lines, cross-hatching, dots, dashes, stippling, that's when you can see somebody's style start showing out. Sometimes a person's style is in the way that they have the proportions not quite right, but often it's all about the way they ink something or the way they use their line work. I'm making these feathers sort of stick out a little bit more, like they're on extra long quills. And I'm trying to make most of the feathers symmetrical, because the asymmetrical feathers are flight feathers. Symmetrical feathers are usually tail feathers or any other type of feather. And since this guy is not flying, we'll sort of say that we should put symmetrical feathers on. I should also point out that I'm just sort of guessing with the feathers. There's a lot of guesswork here. I will just say again, I'm not a dinosaur expert. I just love dinosaurs. I think they're cool. I think they're awesome. They're lots and lots of fun. But in no way am I a dinosaur expert. The great thing about using a ballpoint pen is that you can erase the pencil lines out almost straight away because it's instant drying. On the underside of the belly here, I'm sort of half colouring in and half doing really skinny letter V's. So I'm just doing them more and more until I build up an almost black. So yes, you can colour in an area just black, but if you colour it in where the feathers should be, any bits that you miss tend to look right. I'm trying to make it look feathery. I'm sort of shading in underneath the tail. I'm doing sort of what looks a bit like a line of feathers going up to this sort of fan bit at the end. Again, trying to make most of these feathers look fairly symmetrical because they're not flight feathers. Now that I've got it all marked out, I can get the eraser and erase out all the lines. I'm using a kneadable eraser. I find them pretty good. They seem to pick up the graphite really well, get rid of all the pencil lines without being too brutal on the paper. Now I'm just adding more feathery looking lines, just dashes really, just to give the impression that it's a bit feathery. So like you'll see with a lot of my drawings, the underside is always very dark. I always imagine that there's a light shining on top and the underside's dark. It sort of makes the work fairly bold, and boldness I think is a pretty good thing. You don't want things looking too wishy-washy. Also, if you make things bold, they look more dramatic. So there's forearm here. The one that's furthest away, I want to darken that up because I want the fingers on the forearm in the front to stand out. So to make those stand out, I have to make a bit of darkness here. So I'll do a bit of chest while I'm here. I'm just doing these sort of stylized dashes to represent feathers. The other arm I want to bring it down past the fingers so I can darken up both sides of the finger to make the finger stand out a little bit more. Working on the tail here, making it nice and, I was going to say heavy looking, not really heavy looking, but to make it a good counterbalance. I want to balance out the drawing, and I'm not talking in a scientific way, although the tail would have certainly helped this animal balance. I'm talking about as in an artistic way, so that you've got the main bulk of the animal, you've got a long thin bit, then you've got something out the side which is balanced. So it balances out the artwork, as well as balancing out the poor little dinosaur. Now I'm just roughening up the line along the back here. A few more dots, dashes, to look a little bit feathery. Now what it needs is shade underneath. You need to anchor it down to the ground. So I want to make it look like that foot's really pressing down the ground hard. Just sort of flatten it a bit. And the rest is not that. Well, the rest is just flying through the air. So the bits where it's not got contact with the ground, we make that shadow a bit light, and where it does make contact with the ground, we make the shadow darker. And that sort of helps sell the idea that that foot is pressing down the ground nice and hard. And this is where the ballpoint pen's quite useful, because you can get that dark to light tone just by pressing lighter or heavier with your pen. And that's it, pretty much done. I think what I'll do is add a bit of colour to it. And the other great thing about ballpoint pen is that you can just throw watercolour over top of it. If you haven't got yourself a set of watercolours and you're interested in drawing, I recommend that you get some, because they are just great to colour with. The fantastic thing about watercolour is that they can all just be dry in a pan, add a bit of water, and they come back to life again. So that saves you a lot of money right there. I like Winsor & Newton watercolours if I can get them, but there's quite a lot of other good brands out there on the market as well. Even cheap watercolours is good for this kind of stuff, especially considering that done with biro, you don't need really good quality watercolour because it's not going to last anyway. And that was how to draw a Velociraptor. Aren't they cool?